Director of the District Department of Transportation in Washington, D.C. He's also a former VP of ZipCar, and he's going to talk to you today about the future of urban transportation. And I just want to remind all of you who are taking this class for credit, I'm going to pass around the sign-in sheet, so sign in, and also send me your questions at the end of the seminar, and if you are doing this online, you know what to do via email. So with further ado.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. Good afternoon, everybody. Is this thing on? Can you guys hear me? Okay? Yeah? Okay. Sorry? Okay. All right, great. So, yeah, I want to talk about the future of personal transportation, and we're going to focus on urban transportation. This is a picture that was given to me by Patrick Hayes, the mayor of Little Rock, Arkansas, who took a trip up to, I think, North Dakota. And we were talking about the differences in the problems that you face in different jurisdictions depending on what your level of density is. The level of density here is very low, and their biggest problem is water buffalo. In D.C., we're the second most congested, second or third most congested, it depends year to year, region in the country. And so we've got a lot of problems that go beyond water buffalo. Before we talk about our future, I'd like to talk about our past a bit. We were just having a discussion with some of the students about how wonderful Portland is. I love coming here, by the way. It's just, like, I feel like I've come home. It's just so well planned and laid out. And what's interesting about our original old cities, like Portland or like Detroit or like New York City or Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, is they weren't necessarily built around the automobile. In fact, they weren't built around the automobile. And people were inherently very multimodal. This is a picture of Detroit in, was it like 1917? This is Woodward Avenue, which they're actually trying to rebuild the streetcar on Woodward Avenue. And you can see it's a really healthy, vibrant city, which it's not anymore. It's been in the news lately, 25% decrease in population over the last 10 years. Unfortunately, Detroit is sort of dying slowly. This is a picture of New York City, Broadway and 34th, Herald Square. You can see heavy rail, trolley, peds, and there's a bike in there somewhere if you look closely. Again, a very vibrant city. Philly, 1906. I love this picture because the sidewalks are so wide, right? Then you've got the trolleys, and then that's it. There really are no auto lanes. If you look closely, there's a horse and buggy. But people and pedestrians, period, came first. This is another great picture. This is New York City again, 1905, a little after the turn of the century. Broadway and Times Building, One Times Square. There's a number of things that are interesting in this picture, but the most interesting thing to me is the little hansom cab, which they've dropped the horse, and they've actually put a big electric battery right here. And this thing went 25 miles on a charge, took 8 hours to charge. Around the turn of this century, I bought a number of electric vehicles, NEV electric vehicles, that went 25 miles on a charge and took 8 hours to charge. So it's interesting. We basically put all technology on hold when it came to how to power vehicles. When we went from the horse to electric to steam, then we found the combustion engine and we said, let's just go with that. It was the ultimate in freedom. Gas was cheap. And now we're sort of paying the consequences. So this is actually D.C., 1921. I think it's F Street, downtown. And this is a cool picture for a number of reasons. I'm sort of a bike nut, about 7 bikes, and I love this bike with all the reinforcements on the frame. Also, it was really cool back then to smoke and bike. That's another interesting thing. And I guess some people jump rope and roller skate at the same time, even one-legged folks. But the point of this is that walking and biking are not new. It's been going on for a very, very long time. Let's see what we got here. So, what happened then? Well, we had the 1956 Highway Act, the U.S. Federal Highway Act, which was really meant to link cities, link states. And Eisenhower made huge progress with highways. But then we saw the urbanization, or the freewayization of urban areas, I should say. And the freeways started to infringe on cities and really changed the way cities felt. We also learned that if you build capacity, you will fill that capacity. And basically, you can build and build and build and build, and they will fill it. In DC, according to the official numbers, we've seen an 87% or 82% increase in cycling over the last decade. But our counts show an 87% increase over the last 3 years. And we have put more capacity in the city for bike lanes. This is Los Angeles. I think that's, I can't even count, but I think it's 14 or 15 lanes, that one there. And you see there's still cars trying to drive in the grass, or they're stuck or something. Now, a lot of traffic engineers, if they looked at that, and no diss to traffic engineers, but they would say, you probably need to add another lane. But the problem is, if you add that lane, you'll just have more problems. And this, this was ultimately what it was about. It was about, after the war, people came back, and they said, we don't want to live in the tenement, in the dense urban core. We now have the freedom to live out in the suburbs. And there was a bit of collusion. General Motors, General Electric, Ford, to get rid of the streetcars, to help design the suburbs. In fact, lots of places in Texas and other areas that weren't built around the late 1800s or mid-1800s, or turn of the century, were designed by the auto companies. They had a hand in it. That's supposed to be funny. And so, actually, this is not really a urban highway. The High Line obviously was rail. This is the Big Dig in Boston, but there's a real movement towards trying to undo the damage and revitalize our urban cores. Some of you might know the Big Dig cost, I don't know how many billions, but billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. In DC, we had a 225-mile streetcar system, and it even had the power on a third rail in the ground. And to put that back would be about 11 billion, which we'll never probably have. So we put together a plan to put back 37 miles, which would be about 2 billion, $1.5 billion to 2 billion.
Yeah, DC Transit got bought up by GM.
Yeah.
They ran it into the ground and shut it down.
Well, that was part of the plan. See, so the plan was you'd get people in the private sector to buy up these streetcar systems, right? And then how would they make their money? They wouldn't put any money into maintenance. So they ran them into the ground and just milked all the cash out and then shut them down. And there was an antitrust suit. And GM and some of these other companies, Goodyear, I think, was in on it, or Firestone, and they got fined $4,000. Here's Portland. This was Portland, Harbor Drive in the 60s and then the 70s. So early on, sorry the picture's blurry, but early on, Portland realized that it was a better use of that space for people rather than for highways and automobiles, although that's a very pretty picture. It's tempting. This is, actually, does anybody know what this is? Anyone have a guess? Close. It's San Pedro. This is how I figured it out. Right? So that's San Pedro, Texas. Now, I don't know enough about San Pedro to know exactly when it was built, but I can tell that it was not built at the same time that New York City or Chicago or Portland was. So the problem is, in these old, or the opportunity in these old cities is that you've got the basic bones. You've got the built environment. You've got the architecture and the buildings and the roads and the right-of-way. Here, I don't know how you undo this. I don't think it's possible. I think you'd have to detonate and start over, to be honest. And that's one of the sad things about the auto industry influencing planning and design so much. Now, some of it you can reuse and adapt. Some of these highways can be made into parks. But probably not so many. So this isn't a slasher flick. It's not meant to scare you. This is that exhibit bodies. And what I'd like to do with this image is to posit a theory about cities, that they're really living, breathing ecosystems. And you've got the bones, which I would say is the built environment, the architecture, the roads. The muscle is the economy and the jobs, the residents. The blood is the transportation and the activity. And some people will say that the connective tissue is transit, but I would say blood. But you can make a lot of different analogies. But right now, a lot of our cities are sort of dying slowly, almost from like a cancer. And it's a lot of different things. It's not just automobiles taking over. It's the manufacturing jobs going overseas, people moving to sprawl in suburbs. I mean, it's a complicated problem. But there's some cities that are making a comeback. And Portland really is a national or international example of what can be done with the right leadership and planning to bring a city back. D.C. is making a big comeback. D.C.'s got a good job base, too, with the federal government, which helps a lot. Detroit is dying. Flint, Michigan is dying. And I don't know if they will come back. But the sad thing is, and to sort of sum up the last few slides, is that we really haven't taken care of our cities like we should since 1950. Just like if you don't take care of yourself, things head downhill fast. So what have we learned over the past 100 years? We had a lot of it right. Around the turn of the century, we were doing a lot of things really well. Like we do a lot of times in wars and various other things, we got off track. And the domination of cars in a city that's supposed to be on a human scale can really squeeze life from cities. So I would also posit a theory that we need to take a much more holistic approach to cities and their complex systems. And if you want to bring people back to cities, and that's what my job really was when I was running DC DOT, it's really about firing on all cylinders. It's about public space, right, and creating beautiful public spaces, public transit, but it's also about public safety and public schools and the government working together to make the city viable again. And I would argue that if you do all of those things, but you don't do one, you don't do schools, or you have the highest murder rate in the country, families are not going to move back. And really, for cities to be successful, you can't just have young hipsters in the cities, right? Empty nesters. You have to have families living in cities. So, when designing cities or redesigning, I would argue that you need to focus primarily on pedestrians. And some people will snicker when they see cyclists. I know you guys won't, but in some places I go, they will, because people view cycling as this sort of fun, novel, sort of fringe thing in most places, not as a primary mode of transportation. That's one of the great things about bike sharing. And we're going to be giving a talk at 3 about bike sharing specifically. But when you fill all the bike lanes or regular lanes of traffic with bikes, people commuting to work, not just riding on the weekend, people see very quickly with their own eyes that it's a viable primary mode. Then transit, and then single occupancy vehicles. And we were just talking, some of the students and I were talking about an hour ago, and they're asking me, what do you think cities are going to look like in 10, 20 years when it comes to vehicles? What's car sharing going to look like? Europe or the EU just made an announcement that they want to ban cars from urban cores throughout Europe by 2050. Big statement, big statement. But I think you're going to see that here in the US as well. And when you look at Portland, one of the things I love about coming to Portland is that you don't even have to ban cars because there's so few of them. I mean, at rush hour, there really is not a rush hour. It's pretty amazing. So we'll see, if they need to be banned. If enough of the right things are done, then maybe they won't. But things are definitely going to change. So we're sort of at this inflection point. We have flight actually back to the cities because 65% of the economy is driven by urban areas. And that's why the Obama administration has been so focused on putting money back into the urban cores. And we should see about 85% of people living in urban areas over the next 20, 30 years. So that's a big shift. And so how are we going to deal with this shift? Well, the fact is, a lot of our cities had a lot more people in them before. DC, at its peak in 1952, had 802,000 people. So we're so happy, we're sort of touting that we just crossed the 600,000 mark again. So there's plenty of room for growth, even if you don't, in many of these cities, change the height limit, add more density, although I think that that's going to be an important part of it. Oh, by the way, unemployment, this is interesting. Obviously, we've had a real surge in unemployment lately. The surge has been 2 to 1 in suburban areas over urban areas, which is interesting. So, what are these macro trends that we're seeing? As I was saying, we're seeing this migration back to big towns and cities. One thing that's very interesting, we were also talking about an hour ago, is the fact that younger people are not getting licensed at anywhere near the rate that people of my generation did. I'm generation, I don't know, X, I think. And when I turned 16 in the 80s, it was a rite of passage to get a car and a driver's license. And that's changing, particularly in urban areas that are growing. People are not getting licensed at the same rate, and at an even steeper drop-off, they're not buying cars because of things like car sharing. But also, I would argue that because of all the technology out there, younger people don't need to constantly be traveling to see each other. They're working remotely. They're chatting with each other. I mean, actually, I'm doing all these things too. But things are changing. And that's a good thing. In DC, between our technology initiatives, but really more our car sharing, bike sharing, expansion of bus service, et cetera, we saw a drop in licensure. I think it was 5% from 2006 to 2010, approximately. But it was a considerable drop-off when every other part of the region went up. DC went down. And the other thing is that urban dwellers are now getting more sophisticated when it comes to their dollars. And so, college kids are graduating from school and they're saying, well, I could afford this much house, or buy this condo, or I could put money into savings, or I could spend $1,000 a month in an urban area on a car. And that's according to AAA, who's generally pro-car. It's about 9-something. So people are becoming more sophisticated. The average ZipCar user spends $150 a month. So one of the questions I get a lot from government folks is, do we want to invest in big infrastructure projects or services? And I would argue both. But the big projects, the streetcar system that Earl Blumenauer dreamt up in the 80s and 87, these things take a lot of time. And in the downturns like we're facing now, you got to double down and focus on them even more so that when you come out of the downturn, you've got something to show and you can get the funding for it. But I would also argue that there are a ton of service delivery models that you can build very quickly that are either purely technology-based or just much more cost-effective, higher return on investment, like bike share, which we did in 13 months in Washington. And you can use the private sector to get what you want in government in terms of timing and low cost. So whether it's designing a business model like ZipCar or designing the bike share program in DC, it's really pretty simple. Is there a consumer need? And I've talked to very famous entrepreneurs, and they all say the same thing. Is there really a need for this? What's the need? Explain to me what the need is. And if you can't do that, you probably don't have a business. Also, if you're focusing on the environmental aspect of it, oh, look, I have a pointer. And that's your primary focus in terms of marketing your business or the thrust of your business, maybe not viable. Or you need to change your marketing. People inherently don't make decisions, maybe in Portland. Maybe in Portland. But generally, worldwide, they don't make decisions based on the sort of feel-good aspect of it, or whether it's environmentally friendly. What they do make decisions on is whether it'll save them money, and or time, eliminate hassle, or enhance their quality of life. And if you can do those two things, and then the cherry on top is that it feels good to do it because they know that there's a benefit, then you've got something. So briefly, we'll talk about Capital Bike Share. How many of you guys have been to DC since we launched it? Probably very few. Huh? Actually, quite a few. OK. So DC was the first city in North America to have a bike sharing program. We had the Smart Bike program. It had a very small wheel in the front, big wheel in the back, sort of looked like something Pee Wee Herman might ride. It was run by Clear Channel. And a lot of the advertising companies got into this business because they knew that cities wanted to experiment. It was something they could sort of throw in like a cherry on top of, in our case, $87 million bus shelter contract. The contract was written pretty poorly. There was nothing written in the contract about expanding the system. And when you have 100 bikes and 10 stations, obviously, to scale it, you need a hell of a lot more because this is a node-based business. So after many months of trying to talk to them and get them to rethink this, we decided we were going to bag it and start fresh. So I went up to Montreal in August of 2009 and saw the Bixby system and just fell head over heels in love with it. It was amazing. It was also beautiful weather. You know, I was down on the waterfront. I had this romantic love affair with Bixby. So I came back and I talked to our team. They agreed this was the system that we wanted. We worked with Arlington County, who was already working on a procurement, and we put this together in 13 months. And we launched it in a matter of weeks with the help of Alta, which is based here in Portland. And you know, there's always various iterations. Like with car sharing in the 90s, you know, it was like there's a key box and you'd have to go find it, and the car was dirty, and you know, then it went to you would swipe. You know, now you can SMS on some services, and so things continually get better. The Smart Bike program, we had to dig in the ground, hook up with Pepco. It was like a $75,000 installation. It was not modular; you couldn't expand it. This was designed in a public-private partnership in Montreal, which, by the way, is a whole separate conversation, how these sort of socialist countries incubate businesses that the private sector might not fund, like this, and is now hugely successful and profitable, by the way. They have systems all around the world, London, Melbourne, and so on. But anyway, this you just drop on the ground. It's solar-powered, so there's no hookup for electricity. And you can expand basically as much as you want. It's like an erector set. And the bikes are absolutely bomb-proof. We had like 2 stolen, and that's because like somebody stole a credit card and got one, and then somebody else left one up against a fence or whatever. But you know, in Paris, the JC Decaux system, they've replaced all the bikes, I think, once, 22,000. So this is a really top-notch system, and this is the one that we went with. And we've got a lot of coverage. And the program, so we launched it September 20th at USDOT. It's been so successful. We signed up about 7,000 people that we announced an expansion, about a 40% expansion by the end of the year, so within 3 months. And because so many tourists are using it, and there's so much trial usage, at the daily rate, which is I think $5, our revenues are much higher. So we projected that we would break even by year 4, and that includes the capital. We might break even sooner, particularly if we launch more stations. And keep in mind, that's without selling the sponsorship. So I know here in Portland, I've talked to all the folks here. I know that the idea of making money on transit is like bizarre. And I admire that. I think it's the right attitude. But systems like this can help fund systems like the streetcar. Barclays over in London paid, I think it's a 7,000 bike system, they paid $40 million to sponsor that, to put their name on it. Anyway, we'll talk more about this afternoon if you want more information, but it's really exciting. I think bike sharing could be bigger than car sharing in the long term. So what's the future? No laughs? God, that was a dud slide. Well, obviously, we know here that streetcar is so important. There's something about its permanence. There's something about the tracks, people knowing where it's going. And I would call that marketing. You know, I think there's something about, but by the way, that's our new DC streetcar. But there's something about the simplicity of it and people just understanding it inherently and intuitively. We're rebuilding the streetcar system in Washington, and it was, I expended a lot of political capital on this to the point where I am not at DDOT anymore. But, but that's okay. You know, one of my basic tenets is, or philosophies is, you know, if you're not afraid to lose your job, you're probably not doing very good work, or you're not working as hard as you should be, at least in the kind of jobs that I take. So one of the ways that we got people so excited about the streetcar, we brought them over. They've been sitting in the Czech Republic for 4 years. Besides putting the tracks in ahead of the NEPA process and various other things, we actually took the cars and we just stuck them right downtown on the street. Actually, in a parking lot next to the street. It costs about 50 grand. But you have to spend some money, you know, to make some money. So we dropped them down there. We put them next to our circulator bus, our bike share program, and people came in droves to come see them. And they got really excited. It became real for them. Again, this is part of our marketing campaign for the streetcar. When the council initially agreed to give us $53 million to finish the initial line segment, in the middle of the night, the council chair pulled the funding, 2 a.m., and the next morning nobody knew. It was a huge deal. I found out. I went down there. I jumped on TV, and we pulled out our Twitter accounts. The local blogs jumped on it. Within 2 hours, their phone system was shut down. It was so inundated with calls, and their email server crashed. And then 3 hours later, the money was restored by the chairman. So marketing, politics, it's all very important. The council chair is now the mayor. So again, I'm not at DDOT anymore. But the beauty is, but the funding's there. And there's so much pressure now for the streetcar because of all the stuff that we did, all the outreach into the community, that it was just given another $100 million by the same guy that took the funding. What else is in the future? On the right here, you've got the design for a new train over in Shanghai, I believe, that rides on the highway on rails on the side of the lanes and allows cars to pass through it. It's an interesting idea. I don't know if I like it or hate it, but it's interesting. Personal transportation is going to change dramatically, and this is something we were talking about earlier as well. These sort of personal utility pod vehicles. I think that in dense urban areas, you're going to see a lot of these. You may even see them in these multimodal hubs where the bike sharing is. They may even be attached to the bike sharing stations. This is an electric vehicle built by Honda, or it's a prototype built by Honda. But I think you'll see probably dual mode where you'll have something you can pedal, or you can use the electric power. And actually yesterday in Salem, I was using a Sanyo electric bike. I think you guys might have some here. Pretty impressive and simple. This was an MIT project from, I don't know, early 2000s, sort of based on the ZipCar concept. Again, think sort of multimodal hub. It's at the subway station. It's collapsible, point-to-point car sharing, basically. And again, see how it looks like a personal utility vehicle. This one, I think, holds 2 people. Some of them will probably hold 1 person. And the good news is that technology is moving so quickly, whether it's solar. Like I was in New York pitching DOT on bike share recently for a 10,000 bike system that they're looking at doing. And the solar panels that we have on our system, on the public bike share system, have already been scrapped in favor of a new 5-foot cylindrical 360-degree passive light solar tube. I don't know if that's the technical term, but it's amazing. It's got 9 times the power. It's like 290 watts instead of like 30 or 40. So we're starting to get to the point where we're generating enough power to not only power bike share, but lighting systems, to store power in batteries and sell it back to the utilities, or to power small pod vehicles. There's our existing solar panel up there, which is going to change and be a 5-foot tube. Here's ZipCar's first plug-in hybrid. I think that's in San Francisco. This up here is an existing vehicle. It's a Piaggio 3-wheeler. It's got 2 wheels in the front, 1 in the back, and it's a hybrid electric. And this is the new Puma that's being tested by Segway and General Motors. Another example of one of these personal utility pods. So, how are we going to make this change that we so desperately need to make? I think that we have to align our goals. You know, we have these sustainability goals. We don't want Manhattan to fall into the ocean, yet we also don't want bike lanes there for some reason. We want to fight obesity. We have an economy that's teetering because we don't have a manufacturing base anymore. So if you don't come out of school and go to a high school and go to Portland State, how do you get a job that pays well? So we have all of these different goals. And to reinvigorate cities, we definitely need to, the easy thing is, we talked about making the big investments and the small investments. Repurposing space is really easy. And in New York, they've done a great job of this. This is a picture of Pennsylvania Avenue, which is one of the most wonderful streets in America. This was in judging by the cars, I think we're looking at the 50s. After we closed the streetcar system down in 1962, basically this space in the middle was just empty. There's just nothing there. So Earl Blumenauer, you guys probably have heard of him, he and I were talking. He's like, why can't we put bike lanes on Pennsylvania Avenue? It would make such a great statement, da, da, da. And I was like, you're absolutely right. He's like, but it'll never happen, will it? And I was like, I don't know. And I went and talked to the mayor. And I said, look, we have all this wasted space. What do you think about using it for bike lanes? I had a great mayor, by the way. Also, always work for great people. They give you a lot of leeway. He even gave me enough leeway to really screw these lanes up and then fix them. But that's a whole other story. But you know what? This costs like, I don't know, 80, 90 grand. But it made an international statement about biking and the priority for cyclists. And when we did the ribbon cutting, there's my mayor, Adrian Fenty. I'm hiding there with the helmet. There's Earl, Oberstar, Secretary LaHood, and some of our local council members. But people were just thrilled and excited. And this is America's main street, and now it's really representative of I think, our values, or what they should be. Yes, sir?
Irony in there, those rails were not torn up. They were paved over.
Yes.
And that's true throughout D.C.
Yes, we do tear them out sometimes because we have utilities in there. So when we reconstruct, you'll see them being torn out. It brings tears to my eyes. We're working with the Deputy Secretary to see if we can avoid some of the NEPA process by saying the tracks were already there, so we're just putting them back, which to me seems extremely logical.
The same gauge as what's currently being...
They're slightly different gauge. But, well, actually, you know what? I'm not sure of that. I'm not totally positive about that. We've also made some other big statements in Repurpose Space. This is actually, this goes right by Treasury, down on 15th Street. So we have a two-way cycle track that runs all the way through the city from the neighborhoods down to the National Mall. And then there are plans for east-west connections also. And some people say, well, why do you want to do that right in the heart of the downtown? Because that's the hardest place to commute, and that's how people need to get to work. In the neighborhoods, we have a lot of bike lanes, shared use paths, all that sort of thing. So this stuff is cheap. Back to the earlier thing, what should we invest in? This also was like, well, when we extended it and redid it, maybe 200 grand for the whole thing. Even with the signalization changes, it's nothing. And the street's already there. We also need to communicate to people, I think, more effectively, particularly in the government. So when I came into the agency, we really put a new GUI interface on the front of the agency. It was a black box, and we wanted to make it much more user-friendly. Instead of people even having to ask us for information, we want to proactively put the information out there to them in real time or weekly in the case of projects. We built a project portal. So any major project in the city, you can go in, and every week we update it with the financial information, all the milestones, all the meeting documents, the plans. If you really want, like if you're a real wonk, you want to drill into it, you can do that. New website. We put a new online permitting system in. And some people have also asked me, well, how did you fund all these things? Because we were a charter agency, so we actually generated our own revenue. And this was something that Dan Tangerlini, who was there before me, envisioned for the agency. So the year I got there, we still took like $7 million from the general fund. The year I left, we threw off $40 million in profit back to the agency to reinvest in programs. And the way we did that was doing things like our online permitting system, where people used to walk down and stand for 30, 40 minutes just to drop the plans off and then wait for somebody. You could spend like half a day in our permitting office. So we built an online permitting system to save people a lot of time, made our job more efficient, and then we charged them a technology fee, a small fee, but it adds up to the tune of millions. Sorry? The consumer, which was often a business who was applying for a public space fee. We also retallied all the right-of-way for the utilities, so we charge right-of-way fees. And it turns out they had a lot more right-of-way than they were claiming, than they were tallying. So there was a lot of free money there, basically, and a lot of governments, unfortunately, are not looking at that. One of you earlier reminded me to put this in. We were talking earlier about this tension, this sort of stupid tension between modes. Like people act like I'm always a driver, I'm always a pedestrian, or I'm a cyclist. You don't have it maybe as much here. Back east, it's a big problem. Big problem. A lot of tension. And people argue about whether we should be giving this time, money, and space to pedestrians or cyclists. So what we're trying to do with these campaigns is to remind people of a few things. One is that they're a pedestrian often when they're not in their car. When you park your car, then you're a ped. That people are multimodal, and that you don't need to make a capital investment in personal transportation anymore. If you move to DC between the metro, the streetcar that's coming, the circulator bus, the metro bus, the 2 car sharing programs, I don't know, I could go on and on, bike sharing, you really don't need to own a car. And it's working, and that's why our registrations are going down. And also, leveraging technology is very important. How many of you guys have heard of NextBus? NextRail? Okay. So it's like a ticker that goes into the bus shelter. We have a lot of stimulus money in DC for NextBus. And we said, you know what? We have this idea for a multimodal sort of virtual station, every few blocks, where you have, bus and streetcar and bike share. But we want to get the information to people so they know ahead of time what's coming, when, where. And so this tells people when the circulator bus is coming in real time. Keep in mind, all these vehicles and modes have GPS on them, GIS, et cetera. So this is really just scraping public data. So you know when the bus is coming, you know where the closest rail station is, but you also know how long it takes to walk there and when the next rail or train is coming. You know how many bikes are in the bike share stations that are closest to you, and how many zip cars are there, and that we can have sensors in the spaces. So there's not a lot of ingenuity in government. There is in Portland, but not in most places. And this costs us $25,000 to build. And we can install it in every bus shelter for about $3,000 a piece. It'll end up being cheaper than NextBus. And all you need is a wireless connection on the bus shelter. And we have free Wi-Fi throughout the city. This over here is the spot cycle application for bike share. So all the data that we produce in the city, whether it's when you call in about a pothole or any of our new parking meters, any of our new systems, they all have to be open source data. And if you won't be open source, then we won't do business with you in DC. And then all this becomes public, and then people write hundreds of apps around it, which is wonderful. And I think the future for government is more participatory government by the public and less just sort of simple service delivery. In terms of marketing services, again, we aggressively marketed services, and when it came to Capital Bike Share, I was a real pain in the ass about the website. And I think at the beginning it was like, take it and ride it. And I want it to be more like ZipCar, to really be simple, but to explain the full process. And the website has been very well received, and we're signing up, at this point, we're signing up 80 people a day, which is more than ZipCar is signing up in DC for car sharing. Oh, I meant to pass this up. The other thing that we did is we tried to align goals within the agency. I spent about 5-6 months meeting everybody in the agency and going around and pitching them on my vision. This is our second action agenda, and this is available online if anybody wants to look at it. We also got public input and stakeholder input from council members and so on. And there's a big problem in government with a lack of transparency, but also getting people on board within these agencies to deliver on the vision that the public has. So the first step is to align that vision, get people on board, and then set time-specific goals. And people think that I was there for a long time in DC. I was only there for 23 months. But we got a ton done. And we really spent about 6 months doing the vision. So it was really about, 15 months of really just plugging away doing work. So the argument that government is slow, stagnant, you can't really do things quickly, it's sort of bullshit, to be honest. I mean, you really can. If you have the right leadership, if you have the right mayor, the right DOT director, the right leadership team, and you make some tough calls. I mean, we did have to lay off 170 people. We did take our marketing team from 1.5 to 6. And we sort of moved our focus around. But it was important. And so I'll try to close this down soon. There are a couple keys to success, I think, in government at least. And a lot of that is, I think, hiring entrepreneurial leaders and allowing them to innovate. And setting up a government agency as a charter or as an enterprise agency and giving it its own budget authority and the ability to generate revenues can be very important. You have to show results of your work, and you got to make that data public, even if it makes you look bad. You know, it's very important to be completely transparent. Marketing is very much lacking in government, and even these days, sometimes in the private sector. And you got to look at the return on investment. Oh, but back to the marketing. If you put as much emphasis into explaining to people why they should use something as you do into putting it out in the street, you'll double the usage of it. The return on investment can be much higher, as people in Portland know, on the bike and ped stuff than on the highway stuff. You know, I have gotten international, I don't know what, cred for some of the bike and ped stuff that all total costs less than $1 million. But the $365 million 11th Street Bridge that we're building, nobody really cares about. So, you know, people are reacting to the things that are improving their quality of life. One of the big benefits, or ancillary big benefits of a holistic approach to transportation, focusing on all aspects, is the ability to put people back to work, which is very important. Also, lowering health insurance costs. When we get those people back into our cities, we have a better tax base to provide better services. So all this stuff is tied together. So if we want to bring families back to cities with better schools, we need more people. So you got to start somewhere, right? And of course, we want a better environment. The other thing is, we're only here for what, 80 to 100 years? I don't know, maybe our life is going to extend to 120 years, but you're only here for a limited amount of time. You know, where do you want to live? I'd rather live in the pictures in the bottom, personally. And the other thing is, you know, I mean, we all want to make money, but you can only take so much. Well, you actually can't take any money with you, right? So, you know, there's something to be said for leaving your mark and doing some good work. And so my message, I'm trying to be inspiring now. Let me have some more coffee. People shouldn't be fearful. I mean, fear is really our biggest problem in this country and why we're not innovating more, particularly in government. But fear should be motivating us to make some change. Fear of what's going to happen if we don't. The other lesson is sometimes everybody else is wrong but you. And you have to be able to stand up and recognize that. If more people did back in the 50s, we'd be in a different situation. Or in the early 2000s with the war and various other things. Always have a good boss. It can be a great job, but if it's going to be with a bad boss, I wouldn't take it. I grew up in a yoga commune, and my guru used to say, make as many mistakes as you can in as little time as possible, and then in parentheses, and try not to repeat those mistakes. And we have an aversion to trying things. You know, a lot of the stuff that we did in D.C., we did as a pilot. In fact, almost everything was a pilot. Because people are scared that something's going to be permanent, and we're scared of change. There's so much change going on around us in this country, and a lot of people don't like it. So if it's a pilot, they have time to give feedback. You can tweak it. And if it fails, it fails, right? But failing is not so bad, as long as you don't fail twice in the same area on the same thing. Change is hard. It gets easier, but like I have to tell you, when I walk around D.C. and I see the streetcar tracks going in, and I see people on the bike share bikes and the circulator bus expansion, I see that. All of those things were hard and politically just brutal. But there's nothing more rewarding than that stuff, you know, when you actually get it done. So anyway, each of you can play your role. I am not an engineer or a planner. In fact, we were joking the other night after a couple beers in Eugene, during the presentation, by the way, that I was just a dude with a business degree, which is actually sort of true, and a lot of motivation. So there's nothing stopping all of you from doing any of the work that I'm doing, basically. And that's my presentation. Thanks.
All right, thanks for firing us up.
Yeah.
So we're going to take some questions. Remember to use your microphone on the table, and if it's not working, flag me down, and I'll bring you this. You pick.
Oh, you, sir?
So you mentioned how a lot of transit stops will have GPS in them. Do you have that as GPS systems in the bike shares themselves as an effort to keep theft down? And if not, what do you do to
Well, the bike share stations have GPS built into the station, or is it GIS? Anyway, yeah, GPS. The bikes are getting GPS. The new ones have it. I don't know if ours do. But they're very hard to steal. I mean, if you put your credit card in and get one, and you don't bring it back, we just charge you for a bike. And we pre-authorize your card for a certain amount, too. So we're not too worried about that. And the system's like bomb-proof, so it's nearly impossible to take one out without paying for it. Yeah, I think all of these modes and all of the stations will have the ability to network and communicate. Our parking meters do now. So like the old dumb meters, which I think actually most of them here is sort of the old mechanical meters, when they go down, the only way you know is when somebody calls in and tells you, right? Or the meter maid goes by to collect the money and they see it says fail. So our new meters, it's real simple. It's just a little $300 piece that slips in place of the old meter, but it's got an RFID chip inside, and it's communicating every 3 seconds. So let's say it gets jammed, it sends an alert to our server and lets us know, and somebody gets dispatched to fix it. So one of the really important things there is we got more calls about parking meters than everything else in the city combined until we start putting this technology to the tune of millions of dollars a year. So there's ripple effects of utilizing this technology too.
So you commented, that bicycle programs are basically small change in some ways, right? Mm-hmm. So what is it, even ignoring the automobile versus alternatives discussion, within the alternative transportation financial allocation, we still put, tens of millions into transit when we put tens of thousands into bikes, even though it looks to me like we could gain new, the cost per new person using that mode is incredibly cheaper for bikes. So what's it going to take to make that resource allocation rational?
Well, there's the federal resource allocation, then there's the state and local. And what I learned, because I didn't know anything about government finance really when I took over, I thought we had like a $125 million budget. We actually had about a $900 million budget with everything loaded. But we could choose, like there's budget and then there's obligation authority. So as an example, you may have $150 million in budget between your surface transit budget and various other pots of money, but you may only have $100 million of obligation authority, which is very strange. But what it means is you have to pick and choose what you want to do. And so there's political pressures to rebuild that bridge or complete the sidewalk network. And so a lot of it does come back to the political pressure that's applied and building demand from the public. At least in DC, that was very important. Then we locally can decide, you know what, our surface transit money, we want to put so much of it into, like we decided we're going to put 5% into bike and ped, period, which is a small amount, but way more than most people do. But then also in all of our projects, we're going to build in a bike and ped component. So let's say we're doing a $20 million streetscape project. Federal Highways is going to pay for that. If I want to put bike lanes in, if I want to put new parking meters in, bike parking, anything I want to put in, they're going to cover it. So you got to make sure that all these mega projects or larger projects include all the elements. And that's where advocacy also is important. But there's more flexibility, I think, on the local level than people know. You, ma'am? Yeah.
So you had the picture of San Pedro earlier, and I know that you said that that's a difficult situation and you're not sure what the solutions for that are. And what we're doing in Portland, DC, and all that is really great. But San Pedro type areas make up a huge portion of our population. From a business perspective, do you not see applications of ZipCar and bike share and that sort of streetcar or other in those areas?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. My experience, even though I grew up in an area, I grew up in Charlottesville. I guess it's a little bit like sort of Salem and Eugene combined. And I grew up as a young child in a very rural area. But my most recent experience the last 20 years has not been in those areas. And what I have seen is that things have to get so bad that the public demands some sort of change. I don't really see ZipCar working there. If you don't even have a sidewalk or bike lanes, I don't see bike share working there. I think we've made such horrible mistakes that you sort of got to blow it up. And that's what they're doing in Tyson's Corner. They're blowing it up. I mean, they got like a 12-lane highway where you can't even... I used to work there at 8484 West Park, and to go across the street to the Panera, we'd all have to pile into a car and drive across the street. I mean, it's that painful. So, I mean, I think in San Pedro, and let me see if I can pull that picture back up. I mean, it's sort of a spaghetti mess. But to keep in mind, too, that I'm a business guy and not an engineer or planner. I mean, maybe you guys could come up with something. From a business standpoint, though, I don't see a lot of sort of progressive business models that'll work. But maybe I just, because I'm not in that, I don't think of it. Do you guys have any ideas? Yes?
One business model is a bad business.
The prognosticators, a lot of them are saying that we're not, our grandchildren are not going to be dealing in a material future that we are. And if there's one thing that gets Americans' attention, that's the cost of things. Well, if you don't have any money and big government's been put out of business, then you're going to do with less. And you look at countries where there are a lot of people on bicycles, and they live at a lower economic level, which we may very well. The problem will take care of itself.
Well, that is a very good point. We have the MS4 permit problem from the EPA where they want us to deal with the permeable, quality of our pavement because of all the runoff. And in DC, they want us to spend about $1 trillion to retrofit all the streets with underground storage tanks, which I just found bizarre. I said, you know what, I'd rather make all those streets gravel, although we can't do that because all of our utilities are in the ground. I mean, there's lots of these problems that I think are going to work themselves out from an economic standpoint. But you're absolutely right. We have an opportunity right now with the economy where it is to take our money and use it more effectively and efficiently. But also, you're counting on people being rational. And when you look at the Republicans right now, and you know, I can be conservative. I'm actually fiscally very conservative, personally. And so I identify with some of the things that they're talking about. But they're not willing to look at cutting the defense budget, which is in itself a welfare program for corporate America and beyond, or the military-industrial complex, whatever. I mean, I'm getting sort of off track. But unless we're willing to look at these sacred cows, I don't know. I'm not sure what the answer is. But it is an opportunity to use that argument to prioritize the bike and ped stuff and transit. Transit also provides real jobs on an ongoing basis. The highway programs, you know, when we got the stimulus money, we put a lot of money into repaving and roads and bridges, which are important, but those are very temporary jobs, and then people are unemployed again. Transit provides full-time work. You?
So in the promotional, I don't know if it was a poster or a postcard or from your bike share program that you showed earlier, there was a picture of an African-American man on one of your red bikes, and I'm wondering if you have stats on who's actually using the bikes and if they are actually reaching a diverse demographic. And
yeah. Well, I can tell you some good and bad news there. We talked about this earlier too. The bad news is we put about 10 stations east of the river, which is a poor area of the city. And after the first few months, we had more stations and bikes than we had members. So that was not good. On the other hand, you know, things get played up like, well, Latinos like bikes, or, you know, hipsters like bikes, and, you know, African Americans don't, and, you know, the circulator bus is for this kind of person. And what we found is it's much less in general about race and that sort of thing, and more about age. You know, a lot of our bike programs and streetcar and all that, we had people come out against them, but it was generally people over a certain age that just didn't really like the idea of change. So it's more socioeconomic. You know, a lot of my friends, for instance, in DC are black, but they're, you know, under 45, and they consider themselves to be gentrifiers just like anybody else. But we do realize that we need to market differently to the Latin community, to the African American community in Southeast, and the agency is actively working on that. Does that really answer your question? Sort of. I don't have real numbers with me. I haven't been with the agency for like 3 or 4 months, and the program's only like 6 months old. So they may have more accurate data now. Yeah.
Just going off of it, you've been talking a lot about the importance of marketing as it relates to sort of the Department of Transportation. And I think you used the phrase, you know, if you spend the extra money on marketing to people, you'll get twice the numbers. And I think here in Portland, we've seen with Smart Trips and some of our other programs, like a lot of that can be very successful.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting that the language you used, and not to use one particular phrase, but you said, oh, you know, when we tell people how great it is for them, as opposed to, you know, a more model of governance that suggests instead that they should be telling you what they're interested in. And I think that I bring that up because I've spent some time in Minneapolis, and they've got the same system, and you know, just sort of the same way in which there were few stations on the other side of the Anacostia. There were few in North Minneapolis, which is similarly a community of color and all this sort of stuff. So I guess I'm curious as to what would you say are the successes and failures of DDOT in terms of not just, you know, telling people why something's good for them, but actually engaging them in this sort of stuff. Because your presentation had these really awesome, fun-looking modes of transportation of the future, like these sci-fi cars and the bus from Guangzhou or in China. That's so much fun.
Yeah.
But at what point do we need to, you know, say it's less about whatever new shiny thing is on that, and maybe some of the solutions are also like slugging, like that article that came out recently about people coming up with these informal carpooling networks. So I'm sorry if I'm just rambling at you.
No, no, no.
I think that that's an interesting, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, there's really a couple questions. Part of it was that I only had so much space, and here I'm up to like 47 slides, but I'm actually infatuated with ride sharing. I think it's huge, and you know, the dirty little secret about transit is that the bus is extremely inefficient. It gets about 3 or 4 miles to the gallon, and unless you have like 12 people on it at all times, you're better off in a car. So cars are not inherently bad. The problem is that we go to the car as a first choice. And when you always go to the car as a first choice, you use it for things you shouldn't, when you should walk or bike or whatever. But if we could fill the seats in cars, let's say you had 4 people in a car most of the time instead of 1, well, you get a few other cars off the road, right? So that's why we put drive it in there, because driving isn't bad. It's just driving all the time that's bad. So that's, and I could do a whole other presentation on that. But to answer your other question about telling people versus listening, it's a very good question. We spent a lot of time engaging with the community. With the streetcar, for instance, we did public meetings in all the wards. We got a lot of people's feedback, and people weren't used to that in the past. There were a lot of complaints that we didn't do that. Now, could we do more? Sure. But there's only so much time in the day. We did lose 15% of our workforce. So we have to be realistic. Now, in terms of telling people, it's not really telling them, it's educating them. You know, and I know at ZipCar the first 3 years was really spent educating people on what car sharing was and why it made sense for them. Then they ultimately have to make the choice. But marketing is hugely important. And it's not trying to cram something down somebody's throat, but it's providing them all the information so they can make an educated decision versus not.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time. So thank you, Gabe, for a great talk today.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Again, for those of you in the class, if you haven't signed in, please come up here and do so, and bring your questions up to me. And we'll see you next week. I'm not sure who the speaker is.
Oh, it's Klein. K-L-E-I-N. 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 Klein. Here, I'll actually...